Distinguished Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Ukraine, I sincerely congratulate the Honorable Mr. Miroslav Lajčák on his election as President of the 72nd session of the General Assembly. Mr. President, Ukraine fully supports all 6 priorities defined by you for the upcoming session and is ready to assist you in your noble efforts. A lot must be done to translate our common vision of a peaceful, prosperous, and equal world into reality. And the spiral of violence continues to affect more and more countries and regions. Transnational terrorism, use of force in international relations, proliferation of weapons of the mass destruction, refugee crisis, poverty, human rights violation, and environmental fragility are only some of the challenges we face. The scope of threats demand our joint and resolute response. It is a time to act, and we have a very narrow window of opportunity to avoid the sliding down in irreversible chaos. The United Nations should be the forefront of this process. And Ukraine has always advocated the need to reform the United Nations to meet the most urgent global challenges timely and adequately. In this regard, we welcome the efforts of the Secretary General since the first day of his mandate to develop and implement a robust, comprehensive UN reform agenda. No less, we support the US initiative to promote an effective and meaningful reform of the United Nations. A comprehensive reform of the Security Council is long overdue, and we hope that this session will herald a new momentum in the intergovernmental negotiation on the blueprint for the Security Council reform. Mr. President, let me take this chance to state clearly that we in Ukraine cannot agree more with the call for the sovereignty to be universally respected and guaranteed. This very conclusion was timely and rightly raised yesterday from this podium. When the United Nations was set up, it was designed to maintain peace and security in the world based on the principle of respect, sovereignty, and integrity of borders. The founding nation among those was Ukraine as well, aimed at securing the world where the sovereign rights of free choice to be respected. So was the principle of the guarded by P5 in the name of sustainable peace and security. That was the principle that happened to be so blatantly violated against my own country by one of the P5 member states. This is the principle which is to be back on track upon the whatever means and tools we have in hand. And Ukraine is the right place to invest into this noble endeavor in the name of the sustainable peace and security. That is what millions of Ukrainians have struggled since the beginning of the Russian aggression in the year 2014, both in Donbass and in Crimea. A 3-year-long war with Russia has resulted in 10,000 people killed, 7% of Ukrainian territory occupied, 20% of Ukrainian economy and industrial output is seized, destroyed, or simply stolen. However, the most horrific thing in this situation is that the Kremlin has constantly chosen the tactics of increasing human suffering. The occupied Crimean Peninsula, according to the human rights activists, has turned into the territory of repressions. Anyone disagreed with Kremlin risked their freedom and even life. Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars get arrested even for the post in social networks, or, as it was in the case of the Crimean farmer, Volodymyr Balukh in December 2016 for just putting Ukrainian national flag on their private residence. Persecution of the leaders of the Majlis, the representative organ of the Crimean Tatars, whose activists were banned by the Russian-occupied continues. And only a week ago, Akhtem Cheygos, deputy head of the Majlis, has sentenced to the 8 years in prison for standing up against Russian occupation. Another deputy head of the Majlis, Ilmi Umerov, with a serious health problem, remained under house arrest, not even allowed to leave Crimea for the medical treatment. Russia blatantly violates the UN General Assembly Resolution 71-205, situation of human rights in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. It keeps ignoring all requests of the Office of UN High Commissioner for the Human Rights to ensure proper and full access of the International Human Rights Monitoring Mission to Crimea. The Kremlin pays no respect to the provisional measures of the International Court of Justice imposed on it. The ICJ urged Russia to refrain from maintaining or imposing limitation on the ability of the Crimean Tatar community and to conserve its representative institution, including the Majlis, and to ensure the right for Ukrainian citizens to study in Ukrainian language. Such disregard of Russia's international obligation must receive a proper response of the international community. The international community has to keep close eye on Crimea to prevent a new genocide inspired by modern proponents of Stalin totalitarian ideology against Crimean Tatar and against Ukrainian. And I rely on support on your delegation for Ukraine initiative to ensure the observance of human rights in the temporarily occupied Crimea, in particular a further respect of UN General Assembly resolution. We need to strengthen the international regime of deoccupation of the Crimea. And the fact at the highest international level, the UN General Assembly, Russia was recognized as an occupying power proves that we are on absolutely right track. The time has come to establish a new international group of friends of Ukraine and Crimea to coordinate and promote our common steps. And we count on coordinated and targeted support of our international partners. Militarization of Crimea is another security threat that affects the whole Southern and Eastern Europe, as well as North America and the Middle East. And Ukraine strongly condemned numerous military exercises conducted in the occupied Crimea, as well as close border of Ukraine, in particular West 2017. Together with our neighbors and partners, we urge Russia to ensure full compliance with its commitments under the OSCE Vienna documents and other international rules concerning military activity. The security and human rights situation in Donbass remain no less dramatic than in Crimea. This year, Ukraine initiated 3 major ceasefire attempts: Easter, Harvest, and back-to-school ceasefires. Yet again, Russian occupational troops and their proxies violated them almost immediately. In breach of the Minsk agreement, Russia keeps its regular military and continues to supply heavy weapons and ammunition to the occupation troops in the certain area of Donetsk and Lugansk region. It flatly denies that the establishment of the OSCE permanent control over the Ukraine-Russia border and the release of the hostages within the Minsk process is completely deadlocked. A list of Ukrainian hostages in Donbass grows constantly. People are captured deliberately, and their only fault is that they have a pro-Ukrainian position. We remember the fate of the 16-year-old Stepan Chubenko, who was killed 5 shots in the head after Russians saw him wearing Ukrainian ribbon. Another example, 63-year-old Donetsk theologian Igor Kozlovsky is in jail for over 2 years under the false accusation and deprived of any communication with the family and friends. And Russia still keeps at least 16 Ukrainian political prisoner on its territory. Ukrainian film director Oleg Sentsov and Ukrainian journalist Roman Sushchenko are among the most prominent cases. Just think about it. Stealing other nation land, kidnapping people, conducting hidden war, dowing civilian aircraft, spreading lies globally. Is this a kind of behavior we expect from the Permanent Security Council member? Russia is not a contributor to the international security, but its biggest threat. Russia is perhaps the only country in the world that has a conflict, hot, frozen, or potential, with almost all its neighbors. Mr. President, the key problem in Donbass is that Ukraine and Russia strive for completely different things. Ukraine wants peace and restoration of sovereignty of its territory. Russia wants control over Ukraine and undermine every effort to restore our sovereign control within Ukraine's border. So Russia tried to exchange peace in Ukraine for Ukraine's freedom. And I want to make a very strong message. Ukraine never accept that kind of deal, nor will the international community. The latest hybrids, thank you. And the latest hybrid peacekeeping proposal from Moscow are yet another example of Russia's real ambition to legalize its proxies and to freeze the conflict forever. We would welcome any proposal that would bring peace to my country. We remain convinced that the full-fledged UN peacekeeping operation is the only viable solution to de-escalate, to protect the people of Ukraine, and to get us closer to the political solution. That is why the peacekeepers' mandate should cover the entire occupied area, including the Ukrainian-Russian state border. This is the must. And as long as the border is used for the main supply route, for the manpower and weapons to Donbass, there will be no peace in my country. This mission should respect basic UN peacekeeping principles and guidelines. One of them is that UN peacekeepers should be impartial. There is no place for the aggressor's personnel. They cannot be part of it by definition. And let me stress, any abuse of UN peacekeeping toolbox to secure the gains of aggression is absolutely unacceptable. If we have an opportunity to bring peace to the heart of Europe, we should get the condition right. A robust international presence can also help us to cope with the increase of terrorist activities in the conflict-affected areas. The terrorist component in Russia's hybrid war against Ukraine is clearly visible and become a reality of everyday life in Donbass. 3 years ago, the world was stunned when the Malaysian Airlines flight MH17, carrying 298 people on board, was blown up in the skies over the Donbass. Ukraine is determined to do everything to bring justice those responsible for this mass murder. 2 investigations, technical and criminal, have been carried out. Both revealed the details. Those who were behind this horrible crime came from Russia. The missile came from Russia. The death of the MH17 victims is on Russia's conscience. The 5 countries comprised the joint investigation team have decided to prosecute those responsible for downing MH17 within the Dutch judicial system. This year, International Court of Justice has started hearing in the case brought by Ukraine against Russia for the violation of the 1999 Financing of Terrorism Convention. And we hope that the decision on the United Nations highest court will help bring Russian Federation to justice for its numerous violations of the international law and for financing crimes committed since 2014. And as the process begins, we count on support and facilitation for all UN member states. Mr. President, for decades, Ukraine has served as a resolute contributor on the global security. In the name of peace and exchange for the security assurance, Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal, third largest in the world. 20 years after Ukraine was invaded by one of those who were vowed to respect and, if necessary, to protect Ukraine's border. Yet, we remain the resolute advocate of global non-proliferation and disarmament. That's why we strongly condemn nuclear tests and multiple launches of the ballistic missile by North Korea. And we are deeply concerned about the continuous diversion of the resources from the critical human needs to feeding Pyongyang's nuclear arsenal, coupled with the serious human rights abuses. We resolutely stand for reinforced measures to stop Pyongyang illegal activities and bring North Korea in line with the international legal framework. At the same time, let me reiterate Ukraine's call upon UN Security Council to undertake in-depth investigation into developments of the North Korea nuclear and missiles program in order to expose any possible foreign assistance to Pyongyang in this area. We also express our deepest concern with the current situation in Syria. We believe that full implementation and adherence to the word and spirit of the 2012 Geneva Communiqué and UN Security Council Resolution 2254 are absolutely vital for the settlement of the conflict in that country. What draws our special concern with regard of this bloody conflict is Russia's use of the occupied Crimea as a military outpost for projecting power in Syria. As the war there rages on, huge number of Russian military assets are deployed to Syria by ships based in the Crimean harbor. It is also deeply disturbing that the African continent continues to suffer from the numerous unresolved conflicts. Being UN Security Council non-permanent member, my country has spared no efforts to support the African continent in safeguarding main principle of the international order: sovereignty, non-interference in domestic affairs, the rule of law, and peaceful settlement of the disputes. As a chair of the committee established by the Council Resolution 2127, we have actively supported regional and international efforts to stabilize the situation in Central African Republic. As of Ukraine 2017 January, Ukraine assumed chairmanship of 1591 Committee on Sudan, and we are determined to contribute to the international efforts to resolve the conflict in Darfur. African countries can fully count on Ukraine as its reliable friend. Mr. President, my country is fully committed to implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and achievement the Sustainable Development Goals. Despite heavy defense expenses, for more than 5% of its GDP, Ukraine keeps going through the fundamental transformation, fighting corruption, promoting judicial reform, implementing decentralization, improving business opportunities. A year and a half ago, the economic situation in Ukraine was so dire that we could only dream about macroeconomic stabilization. Now we have all grounds to say that economic recovery is in place, and such areas as ensuring sustainable energy supply, food security, promoting innovation development and sustainable infrastructure, as well as promoting effective public health system, affordable education, and decent work are among priority within 2030 UN Development Agenda in Ukraine. And I am convinced that no country alone can achieve sustainable development without sustainable peace and sustainable security. There is also no doubt that mitigation of global warming remains one of our indispensable elements of sustainable development. And I am proud that Ukraine is fully committed to our obligation under Paris Climate Agreement, and our intention in this regard are very serious. Ukraine was the first European country which deposited its instrument for ratification to the United Nations. Mr. President, the United Nations has always played a leading role in ensuring that the crimes of the past could never happen again. The 72nd session of the General Assembly coincided with the 85th anniversary of one of the deadliest crimes of the 20th century, crime of Holodomor. It was man-made famine in Ukraine in 1932-1933, organized by Stalin's totalitarian regime and killed from 7 to 10 million Ukrainians. Dr. Raphael Lemkin, the author of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, adopted by UN General Assembly in 1948, described the destruction of the Ukrainian nation as a classic example of genocide. And I appeal to all UN member states to make their own historic judgment and to make decisions by recognizing Holodomor as an act of genocide. Mr. President, this is a challenging time for all of us. Every more people die in wars and natural disasters. Truth is blindsided by the post-truth. The world is divided again between those who believe that freedom is indispensable and those who believe that freedom is expendable. One group wants to reach the better future, the other drags us to the past. It's time for those who believe in freedom to come together. It's time for freedom to be strong, convincing, and convinced. Let be that way. And thank you, all of you, for your attention.